Growing up as kids, we all have that one particular movie we saw in theaters that was pretty awesome, even though its reputation isn't solid today. That was the case with me and DreamWorks' Small Soldiers. While it received mixed reviews upon release, I enjoyed it so much that I got an Archer action figure while my older brother got Chip Hazard. It was also with the movie that I saw an advertisement of the video game adaptation. However, I never got a chance to play it, leaving me wondering what I was missing out on. Fast forward 18 years later, I was going around one of my local flea markets when in the corner of my eye, I saw the Small Soldiers video game for the PS1 that was shown years before, and being that it was complete, I bought it for $3, giving it the benefit of a doubt that it would be enjoyable. Before I even got the game, I read a few reviews of it, ranging from mixed to negative. Nevertheless, I took on the gamble. So is this game worth the $3 I paid? Well, let's dive in. Small Soldiers doesn't follow the plot of the film as it has a completely different backstory while retaining its elements. Basically, for unexplained reasons, the Commando elites have decided to conquer Gorgon, the homeworld of the Gorgonites. As Archer, leader of the Gorgonites, your objective is to subdue the raging force of the elites. The game is a third-person action-adventure platformer where you traverse various locations of the game to take out commandos, save your allies, and acquire items and such to access more routes towards the goal. The commandos aren't the only type of enemies you'll come across, as they prepared more than just appearing from the assembly line, with a variety of enemies obscuring your pathway. It all sounds basic enough and should be filled with much action and excitement, but sadly, it results to nothing more than promised potential underwhelmingly executed. First of all, the gameplay is less than average, to say the least. It has a familiar feeling to that of the old PS1 Tomb Raider games, but most of the time, you'll find yourself running around aimlessly jumping from one platform to another and unlock tons of doors and usually destroy something bigger than you are at the end. In the beginning of each level, you're given various objectives to complete, but some of them seem vague since most of them you can meet without dedicating much thought to. They usually require you to destroy objects or enemies or obtain keys to reach a certain point without much clue of where to go. The game has no in-map, which is a real shame since navigating through these levels is tiresome and the draw distance is terrible, even for a PS1 game, and with most levels appearing the same with little difference. There are some secret areas to be found, much like Duke Nukem, but they can be either difficult to reach or cast doubt on if they could be called secrets, and some of them can be easy to reach. I was also disappointed with the amount of action in the game. The film was based around toy figures fighting each other with a variety of arms, generating some impressive scenes. While there are some moments in the game where intense fighting takes place, I couldn't help but feel they could have been bumped up more. Most of the time, enemy encounters are kind of isolated, with nearby groups occasionally taking note of the commotion. The enemy AI varies, as half the time they can get a bit passive, while other times they're just straight up aggressive. You are given your line of arsenal to combat the elites, but they can be either ineffective in some ways or take time to master just to hit your mark. Along with that, Archer has his special weapons such as the Spirit Bomb and Earth Shaker, but these weapons should be deemed necessary when the enemies have you pinned to the corner. With these generic enemies and repeating elites, you'll quickly realize that they don't have much change to their methods, so once you know how to approach them, it can turn into child's play, but the same can't be said for later events. Like in the film, you do face Chip Hazard, but it's not the climactic fight that anyone was expecting. In fact, Chip Hazard is not much of a boss at all. Instead, he's reduced to a sub-boss in almost every level, and his attack methods hardly change with each encounter, and they can be irritating. Most of the time, he'll strafe while taking shots at you, and he never stops moving, making manual aiming nearly impossible. To make matters complicated, there are levels where you duke it out with Hazard more than once. Even moments after you defeated him, he'll reappear unscathed. He does fight differently as the final boss, but it just boils down to you shooting him out of the sky with a turret. So the epic fiasco we would come to expect is non-existent. As for the occasional allies you save, they really don't do much to aid you aside from a couple of things. Graphically, the game is not too appealing, but it's not a complete eyesore. Although rough around the edges, The character models are well detailed, but their animations seem kind of jaggy, which is especially noticeable before you start up a level, and speaking of such, all of them appear bland and depressing. While each level have their share of changes with obstacles, there's no denying that they all look the same, which can mess up your recollection of certain areas. The worst part about it is the draw distance. For a late 90s PS1 game, I was expecting this problem to be eliminated entirely. Each level is shaded in black, pretty much obscuring your sight, only being able to see 10 to 15 feet ahead of you. This is very problematic for precision jumping, as there are tons of situations where you have no choice but to take a leap of faith into the darkness, or when enemies appear in the distance. The only other upside to the graphics is that the cutscenes are well rendered, although they look a bit blurry. The controls are nothing to turn a blind eye on. While the shooting is responsive and the jumping being slightly delayed, the biggest concern is with the movement of your character. Moving Archer is unbelievably sluggish as it affects the game in more ways than one. To start with, whenever you attempt turns with corners, Archer takes them too wide, as more often than not, you'll end up running into walls and you can't recover fast enough, and so you have to adjust your camera to the desired direction. This wouldn't be painful to do if strafing was possible, but with no such ability, it only adds to the frustration. You also can't aim your weapons fast enough to take out the enemies ahead. While the game is compatible with the analog control, it does very little to improve the flaws of navigation. Not to mention that precise aiming while moving is pretty much impossible for this game. I'm not sure if this game was made for either the D-pad or analog stick in mind, but either way the controls are imbalanced. It's also worth noting that for the PS1 and PS2 consoles, analog control can be enabled via the option menu. As for the PS3, it isn't straightforward. Not only do you have to enable analog at the options menu, you also have to press the home button on your controller and switch digital mode to analog mode, which then enables the DualShock. To make the process annoying, every time you start up a new level, your controller automatically resets back to digital, leading you to switch it again to analog. As far as the amount of PS1 games in my possession, Small Soldiers is the only game I know of with this irritating setback. I also can't forget the camera controls, which as expected from early 3D platformers, is unforgiving. I guess the best aspect of this game is with the sound. While the music score is very generic and forgettable, the sound effects are top-notch with nothing being out of place. The most noteworthy thing about the sound is that Tommy Lee Jones reprises his role as the voice of Chip Hazard, which I thought was a nice gesture. It's too bad they couldn't get Frank Langella to voice Archer, as we get Greg Berger instead, whom sounds drastically different than in the movie. Sadly, Tommy Lee Jones alone isn't enough to save this game's integrity. As much as I enjoyed Small Soldiers as a film, I was hoping for the game adaptation to be a fresh and new experience with much care to the details. I can understand and appreciate what this game wanted to be, and while it wasn't a terrible effort, the flawed controls and bland gameplay holds it back by a great deal. So was this game worth the $3 I paid? Well, as long as it's under $10, it should be fine. With the game as it stands, it sure as hell wasn't worth its retail price, which was $35. To add the final nail to its coffin, there's basically no reason to revisit this game. They don't even have a campaign where you play as Chip Hazard, which could have had an interesting take as far as the story was concerned. The only time you can play as Chip Hazard is in multiplayer. Even if you didn't like Small Soldiers or never watched it, this game will not change your stance on it, as it's reduced to a forgotten title with untapped potential, which was upsetting for me because I really wanted this game to be intuitive and fun. But with such adaptations, I digress. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take care.